Welcome back to Have You Heard, the social media podcast by us here at The Social Shepherd. My name is Zoe. I'm one of the co-founders, and today I'm joined by...
I'm Adam, business director.
And I'm Zoe, social media director.
Lovely. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we are going to be talking about something that we all probably deal with on quite a regular basis, given that we speak to a lot of brands looking for our services and work with a lot of clients. But it's, I guess the title is Why Your Social Media Strategy Feels Stuck in 2015 and How You Can Fix It. And I think this is like a mammoth topic of conversation, but where I really kind of see this happen is when brands don't really understand social media and they just go, well, we've got this pot of budget. I've heard that social's a good place to put it in. So here's, I don't know, 10 grand a month to invest in it and we'll put some content out there. But they don't understand that social is a different platform. It does kind of require its own adapted tone of voice, its own rules and stuff. And they just try and do promotional content on Instagram, for example. And they just don't really understand it and don't understand their audience. I guess not to hit on any particular industries, but we do tend to see this in more of like your pharmaceutical industries, because I think if you're in like fashion, for example, and actually FMCG or CPG brands in the US, we see it with them as well. But like if you're in fashion or beauty or like an industry that is quite like trend led, you are going to be in social because social leads a lot of the trends. Whereas if your product is more functional, so it is like a cleaning product, for example, or it is like a household name moisturizer, for example, they're needed on a regular basis. So they're going to sell regardless. But if you do have a really strong social strategy, you're going to be the one that's front of mind for people, but they aren't naturally baked in social. Does that make sense? Like, am I making sense right now? Okay. So I guess, and you've worked on quite, you've done both ends of the spectrum, I guess, Zoe, and I have too, and you probably have as well, of brands that really understand social and want you to push, and they're like, we want this to be the best possible piece of content. And then you've got the other side of it where they don't really look at social media content as content, they just look at it as an asset. But what are kind of the common attitudes that you see between brands that get it and don't get it?
I think the brands that don't get it are normally the brands that have smaller budgets, unfortunately. So then what they want to do is create content and post it across all platforms. And I think that's point number one, is that if you are really going to push something, make it platform specific to get the results. And I think obviously where budget doesn't allow that to happen, you really struggle then trying to get that content because they do want to post on multiple channels. So I think that's number one. I think number two is just educating them on actually like, yes, you can put paid spend behind it, but how beneficial is that going to be? Because technically you are just buying it. So again, making it really specific to the platform to get the results and to engage that community on that platform.
I think the other thing as well is that some people think that to have a successful social media strategy, you've kind of got to be the loudest in the room in those platforms like Instagram and TikTok, for example. But actually, you know, we've seen clients do really well with like Pinterest first social strategies where it's search based. So you're really marketing to people that are in market. And that's actually a really good way that if you are like a more aesthetically led brand, like homeware brands do really good on Pinterest. Fashion brands can do well on Pinterest as well. But for example, Pinterest is one of the highest converting platforms because it is in market people that are seeing your content. So I think there's just this kind of base expectation across the board that social is TikTok and Instagram. And a while back it was Facebook and Instagram. And then before that it was Facebook and Twitter. So there's I think people not really understanding and thinking that social is just one channel when actually social platforms have so many different purposes that it's multiple channels.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think it's consistency across those platforms as well. Like, okay, you might come to us and be like, we've got 10K and we're going to do 4 videos, but then what's going out before and after that? Like, if you're not consistently posting, you're not ever going to get that visibility that you want. So I think it's taking that into consideration as well when it comes to comes to looking at it.
And it's also like, what's the purpose? And this is probably more similar to what you kind of think about, is what is the purpose of social? Because you've got brands like Patek Philippe, for example, like they have a crazy amount of brand awareness, a very loyal following across all of their marketing. And they very much use their social account. They do like I don't know if they still do it, but they definitely did it like a year ago, where it's the 16 grid post. And it's like, if you took their Instagram feed, it's like one long poster, basically. Oh, that update will have really upset them where they changed the grid layout. But for them, they are taking the approach of this is a shop window, which only works for specific types of brands with specific types of brand awareness. If you're a newer brand and you need to use social to gain brand awareness, then you can't really take that approach, because you need to be working more on the algorithms. But define a purpose for social first is probably where you need to start.
Yeah, I think that's yeah. If I think back to 2012 when I started, like in social media with PlayStation, the essence of building a social channel for them was community based. So it was nothing to do with the overall numbers. It was simply build a group of PlayStation fans, and in doing that, the output at that time, again, early days of social in a way, but you were able to be super promotional because you were talking to people who wanted to know what's happening next with the product. Whereas over time, I think, when we talk about, and you've touched on some of the key words there, like all of these platforms now promote algorithm. If you want to reach the most people, you have to do this with the algorithm. And so I think one of the big problems is people almost forget the purpose of their brand or what they're using their channel for, and think, well, the only purpose for social is to reach a load of people because that's what the algorithms do. And so now you've got this weird dynamic where people with little budget or FMCG or whatever category, they're going into it with, well, the platform have told me that I can reach a load of people, so that's what I'm going to try and do, as opposed to, we talk loads now, and I think when you look at this year and some of the big trends of like, now all of a sudden people going, well, micro communities and this. So people are almost playing to what they believe social should give them, as opposed to, what am I actually trying to do here? Who am I trying to, let's say the purpose, who am I trying to talk to? Because if I'm trying to talk to a niche type of person, forget the algorithms to an extent at the beginning of the broad spectrum of it. I need to think about these, how do I actually reach these people? How many are there? And then therefore, actually, what I want to do is engage and create content relevant to them. And I think, a big shift in mindset has to be at some point, not copying them, but content creators and influencers on these channels that have an audience create content specific to what their audience want. And it's, they may gain big followers over time, but, realistically, if I'm I'm making content for mums, or, I'm Rob Mayhew and it's for an industry, it's not about him having millions of followers. It's about him creating content, and his content connects with all of us, and we share it in the office because we get it. And I think it's that, for me, it's that nuance or that missing piece where people are seeing it as this, it's a broad platform with millions of people on it, so therefore I've got to do that, as opposed to, well, no, actually the purpose here is I've got a product which is reflective of these people. How do I actually engage and talk to them, and then fit my stuff and then use the benefits of the platform?
And I think that's the great thing about creators and obviously influencers as well, is do it in the style of the content that your audience sees as well. Like, don't get a product and then do a really heavy promotional piece of content with it. Do it in the style that your audience loves and engages with, and that's how you're going to get the results.
And the win there is if you can be a product-led business that is also selling a lifestyle. So if we look at like Rode, for example, they do a really good job of like creating stuff that is really aesthetically pleasing and almost like setting cultural trends for the audience that is interested in that. So like, it's much deeper, and we actually see a lot of brands that are newer brands coming up, like social is where they put the majority of their budget, and they're taking the budgets that brands would traditionally invest in, like TVCs, for example, and putting that into social art direction because they understand the importance of it. And I think the difficulty is that for more traditional brands, they're struggling to adapt their mindset from that more traditional marketing view to understand, well, how do I coexist with this TVC that I've always done over here and then have social doing this over here? And it's like, I know that everyone talks about having like a holistic brand strategy, and I do understand why that's important. But also your audience kind of expect to see different stuff from you on TikTok than they expect to see in a TVC. They do. Do you know what I mean? Like, and we have to be able to accept that that is going to be needed.
We've had a client actually recently, and I think they're doing it so right, where they have another creative agency that have set the brand message, and then they have literally come to us and been like, this is the brand message that we want to get across. Do whatever you want to do to get that brand message across on social and adapt it to social. And I think that's how you should be approaching your content.
My back to kind of what you were saying, my pet hate is when brands come to us and we go, they're like, hey, we want you to just do social. Okay, firstly, broad message there. Okay, like what are we trying to do? But they go, and then you go, okay, so how are you going to measure the success of whatever we decide to do? And they go, follower growth. Or they just go reach in general. So like those two metrics on their own, like they have to have other things around them, because if you just go reach, okay, well fine then, we'll just hop onto every single trending moment over the next 12 months. We'll create you memes, we'll create you this, and you end up going for the lowest possible hanging fruit. And actually that can be more detrimental to a brand, because just because you're getting 5 million views on a monthly basis, is that content setting the brand up for success? Because if it's a slightly higher ticket item, do people really want to see you like kind of bringing yourself down to that kind of like lower ticket item, or do they want to see the value that they're going to, or the quality that they're going to be getting through your product represented in your social content? So do they want to see more like CGI, AR, higher quality, really well thought through ideas? So probably a lesser quantity of posting, but at a higher quality. And that doesn't mean everything needs to be shot on camera. Like we've got, was it Jacquemus or Balenciaga just filmed their recent fashion show on an iPhone. But it's the care that goes into it. And then on the other side of follower growth, if you just go to an agency or a marketer and say, I want follower growth, like follower growth is a consequence of a well-planned social strategy, which is reaching the right people through the algorithm, not all of the people.
But also that in itself, like follower growth, it's great, but you've got to cap it, right? Like you've got to understand that, you know, if you're a niche product, your follower growth, and I think again this comes back to like where people look at social and they see metrics, algorithms or whatever, and they do it. Whereas as opposed to, you know, if I go broadly in the UK, product which is aimed at mums, I go, right, okay, actually my first point if I want follower growth is to go, well, how many mums are there in the UK? If I'm a UK-based business, how many mums exist in the UK? Then I'm going to layer in my target. So actually, it's a more premium product. You're targeting, for argument's sake, a Waitrose shopper. So now it's diminished. So I've actually got available to me 8 million at a push. So if I end up then putting my content and go, oh, we've got 1 million followers, that's great. Mm-hmm. You know, in the grand scheme of how brands connect with people, that's, you know, 15-20% you're pushing of that audience. That's great. Like we've done, whereas people forget that because they forget the layering of it's just this broad follow account. Well, where do you end? Where's the start? Like how? Because it's not for everyone. And so I think again, it's these metrics and you start layering. And also on top of that, people are very see social and they follow the guidelines of, I think often that's what presented rather than shifting on its head and looking at different things. Like again, if you're creating content, view through rates, there's so many ways you can manipulate that data or change that data or use that data in a different way to actually give you a better answer to what you're trying to get, determined by like, okay, as a business, what are we trying to achieve? You know, we will take a view, which is 3 seconds on Facebook or whatever it is, and we count that as a view. Whereas actually, well, no, actually what we want to do is we want to start tracking it at 50% of the video views or whatever. So again, I think these are the problems as you take these, my point being is you take these surface level metrics with ill guidance or not really understanding what they are, what the capabilities are, and you've got this melting pot of nothingness in a way because it's just gets back to where you started, which is, oh, well, we need to do all these things. Just make a couple of videos, would you? Because there's no real guide to what we actually trying to get out of it. And I think that's why it feels quite stuck.
If there's any like bit of advice I could ever give to a brand trying to brief in an agency or an internal team member would be, don't say our objective is follower growth. Follower growth is a metric, and it is we can have it as a KPI, for example. Reach is the same, but set a broader objective that aligns with the business goals. So we want to own this space, or like a really good one that we had from a client was we want social to be 10% of overall traffic to site, for example, and that really gave us an insight as to, one, how does not just the team that we're looking at, but how does that wider business contextualize success, basically. And then we were able to build everything around that. So and also look at some type of like multi-level attribution system where we could say social has contributed to X amount more traffic, and it's making it exist, because we can get a whole load of followers, but if they're not actually doing anything or converting or even exploring the site or going through it, doesn't mean anything to that brand. So it's making sure that we're looking at our KPIs and metrics, and they're indicators of, is content performing? Are we engaging well enough with our audience? But those are all components of a bigger objective. Does that make sense?
And just to add to your point, I think when you look at reach, I don't disagree with that being a target for a company. I think that is a good one to have, but be clever about it. And a really good example of this is, I'm pretty sure it was John Lewis, and they did the trend, it's not just a jumper, it's a bloody blah blah. And that was a Gen Z trend of massive text on screen, and they had flipped it to a voiceover. So your older audience saw it and they just probably thought it was a promotional piece of content for a jumper, but your younger audience saw it and was like, they've jumped on a trend, this is really cool. So you've got both those audiences coming together there. And I thought, do you know what, that's a great piece of content for that reach and to get both those audiences in.
I think that's a good idea of like, I think social has so much potential these days, and it's like, I do understand it from, if you are working in a brand and social isn't your specialism, like it probably would be quite daunting and you probably would default to, this is what I feel like people do. But there's so much more to it, and it can bring you so much more value. And I think we do need to do more than just go, okay, well, we're going to do TikTok because we see Duolingo doing it like this, or we see Ryanair doing it like this, and then we're going to do Instagram, and we want like a pretty feed aesthetic. Like, feed aesthetics are kind of out the window, to be entirely honest. Product doesn't look shit, then it's fine. But the way that people consume content is so different now. And I agree with you. Like, I think we've got different ways that people look at that stuff. You know, like the Reels algorithm, for example. If you're reaching a whole load of people that are within your target audience, there's a lot of value to that, but they're not always going to convert over to followers. If you see consistent follower growth over time, it means you're reaching the right type of people. But there are some people who just don't follow accounts, and then it's about consistently reaching them.
It's also like, I think that when you literally there, that people don't follow accounts, like it's also for me like seeing social as an answer. Like, I think, like, not to sell us as a business and what we do, but also I think like brands, and if you think about how your brand and your product at a top end level, before you even get into your channels, I'm sure you're doing like user journeys and all of that kind of stuff. And the reality is there's so many different channels that fall, Reddits and things like that, and forums fall into the realms of social, in my opinion. But people, it will instantly automatically jump to, the known channels. And it's like, but is that really part of your user journey sometimes? And I think there's certain brands where you can be a bit more creative and go, actually, as a product, we know that you need to be aware of it first. Someone goes, I need this, and they'll be aware of it. But actually where they're discovering or learning about how to use it, it's not on an Instagram feed, it's with an influencer because they're YouTubing it, or it's in a forum because that's where the trust. And I think it's also adapting to those models and going, you can have a pretty standard Instagram presence, but where you're putting your social and your attention is in the other space where your audience are, rather than wasting time creating a feed which is for no one, you're actually going, do you know what? An influencer partnership is more important here, because when someone thinks about DIY, they're not going to my feed, they're Googling or YouTubing, how do I fix this? And actually, I need this product. How do I solve the problem? Here's all the influencers they're watching. That's still social. You're just moving with the feed or with the user journey, and then in the back end, yes, you've got a platform where you can do some ads and use it in that way to re-engage or retarget. But you don't waste all your time and energy making content where you're trying really hard to produce something. You're actually just following where people go.
And also, I think the thing is, like, on that side of it, you don't have to have your social account be the name of your brand. Like, you could have a social account, say you were a DIY shop or like a B&Q or something. They could have a social account that's like, I don't know, building things. I don't know. And it could just be an account.
Or a person, DIY day.
Of like mobile first content of people just building shit. And like, I think TikTok's a really good space for that, because you can see really like niche led accounts with more of that formulaic content. And I think you can get a little bit smarter about it these days. I don't think you need to necessarily even have it be your brand name.
I do still think, though, people go to Instagram for more of like a professional validation of brands.
Absolutely, yeah.
You go there and you're like, oh, they're professional, like they're legit, like this is what they're doing, this is how they're showing up. And I do think it's important to still have a storefront aesthetic to an extent.
I think it is, but I also think it depends on the industry. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're buying, I think if, like, say for example, if we took a cleaning product, for example. Now, I think you could do really fun social content with a cleaning product, and you could really increase reach and awareness, and you could build more of like a personality, so that whenever someone is shopping in a supermarket, they're like, oh, I resonate with that brand. And that's really what you would be trying to achieve there with your owned content. But if then you are doing it on a need to know basis, so say someone needs your cleaning product for a specific reason, I don't know, they spilt red wine on their rug or something like that, then you would be better to go to platforms like YouTube, for example, and work with a cleaning influencer of like how to clean red wine from your rug, for example, because that is a search driven platform, whereas you will find stuff like that on Instagram, but it's less of a search driven platform compared to the likes of your Pinterest and your YouTube, for example. So it's knowing like where the dots are connecting, and what are we trying to put something in front of someone to have them like it even if they're not in market. So then it does kind of need to probably be a bit broader. Or are we putting it in front of someone who needs that product right now for a specific reason? And I think that's just, we're in such a more complex ecosystem than just putting stuff up there.
Well, it's complex as well, because people, you said it earlier, people want to do everything. And so therefore what they're doing is creating one piece of content and trying to stick it everywhere, as opposed to, again, purpose. What we're trying to achieve, what we're measuring, what's the user journey, what's the flow to get to the end point, and then therefore where do I need to prioritize? Because I can have a really nice just shop window on Instagram if no one's going there. If people aren't, because I'm using it for the, obviously the way the platforms work, you need to have that to be able to do your ads and all that kind of stuff. So there might be some engagement, but the user journey isn't like the same across the board. So if you start at the top of it and go, okay, well, how are people actually getting to the end goal of purchase? Now I can start weighting more efficiently what I'm doing, and I can actually create and put budget in areas which are great. Now, there is still a job where I think you talked earlier, FMCG, of like everyday products, moisturizers and things like that. I mean, Dove cracked that with the beauty campaign years ago, which was, how do you create a brand story without having a product in it? You focus on the beauty side of it, and that's what's important. What they're creating there is really great content that can live in a social ecosystem because it makes you feel something. But for most FMCG, really, and obviously pre-influencers, it happened in supermarkets. You saw an ad for it, and it says at the bottom 97% of women agree, and you go, I'll buy that one, and then you went to find it. Whereas now there's so much choice. But I don't think many people, from experience myself of buying, products, certainly when I shaved my head and I was like, I need to have Factor, every day for protection, I didn't Google or go on Instagram. I went straight to influencers where I was like finding people. And then that's where the products came. So, and then I went to legitimize the product. So there is a user journey for different things.
But what I would say is that there are so many user journeys, and it's not what is the user journey, it's what could the user journey be, because if you're not, it's not what is currently going on with your existing audience. It's also understanding that there is an up and coming audience that is going to be needed there. So it's really, you should be going audience first with your social strategy, and you should be saying like, where do they want to find this information? And there's really easy ways of looking at that. You know, if you are a product that tailors to a specific point in life, so say you are a product that, I don't know, is for pregnancy, for example, and you're not active on Instagram or a specific channel, you'll be able to find out where those niche communities are and where people want to be finding stuff like that through search related data, and just for understanding niche communities. So understanding your current user journey, yes, that's helpful, but it's what could your user journey be if you were firing all cylinders, and what would the benefit of that be?
Because there's also going to be nuances as well. Your John Lewis point, they've got 3 or 4 different audiences, and then they've got sub audiences because they sell tech, they sell beauty, they sell fashion, they sell baby. Like, so for them, you've got to have, I suppose, a holistic brand approach, which is, this is how we want to present ourselves. But then you've got potentially within that 6 or 7 different user journeys to get to, because I'm sure the tech, how I buy a TV is going to be very different to how, so you could, I mean, where do you end? That's probably the next question, but I still think that to your point, it's the audience bit. You know, and if you can get into the
audience and shopping habits, and
if you can get into those
product.
details,
which I think is why it's important just in your content strategy is to have a mix of content themes and pillars to test on different platforms to see what is the most useful. And I think we always do a split with our Inspire and our Entertain content to make sure we're not all doing reactives and we're not all doing educational and Inspire, and those ones that will show up for like longevity and like your cumulative reach over time on those discovery platforms versus your viral reach. And I think it's just having a mix and just monitoring performance.
Yeah. I controversially, if I was John Lewis, I would have separate Instagram and TikToks for each of those categories, and then a master brand. That's so much work, but I think you would get better results from it.
Is it? Well, is it? Because like you say, if you're doing it effectively and you know you're waiting, because there's levels there, right? Like as a business then, this is what we're presenting as an output. What we need to understand from you is what percentage of your revenue comes from tech? What percentage comes from, because you're just layering and layering that. And most good businesses, if you look back where they found these options, that's how they approach it. And it is hard, you know, and I'm not saying it's right because they've probably got so many, but as an approach, they're all so different. And if you're going to try and highlight what we're talking about, it's exactly that, which is it's not one size fits all. Yeah. Every product is different, and you need to find what actually is those journeys. What do the audience want? Where do they sit? How do they engage with it? And build from there.
Yeah. I mean, I had this conversation with Jack the other day, actually, because we were talking about some of our homeware clients. And I was like, it's really entertaining because you get some products that come here and they want viral moments. Like they're like, we want to go viral, and they have a product which can cater to that. But then we look at like some of our homeware clients and we go, they don't need that. They're never going to have like that, like big brand moment and such, because they don't need to. Like they're doing what they need to on Pinterest, for example. They have their beautiful Instagram feed. They're there whenever people are in market. They're active. They don't need to do what TikTok or Duolingo are doing, and it wouldn't be right for the brands either. So it's like we've just got so many different ways of looking at it. And I think if you are a retailer that sells to multiple different audiences and has multiple different categories, the decision to buy a TV is a relatively functional and need-driven decision. Obviously, you have all your tech stuff and its affordability and what you can do there, but it's very different to decide to buy a Dyson Airwrap. That is a treat for yourself. You don't need a Dyson Airwrap. And sorry, you don't need a TV either, but most households would consider a TV a need. Do you know what I mean? So they're very different, and it's what type of category and industry are you in the same way that underwear and socks, very different to jeans and denim, for example, and the user experience and the needs around that. So I think if you don't know your audience, your category, and what the kind of level of intent and at what stage you're speaking to them at each platform, then you can't really craft a social strategy around it. And like I said, social strategy isn't just one channel, it's multiple, because we've got search channels in there as well. But I'm going to get away from this because I feel like we could sit and harp on about this forever. And I'm going to ask very specific questions, okay? So let me just unlock my laptop. So Zoe, this one's going to be for you. And we get this a lot. Hashtags.
Use them, not use them.
Well,
What's my opinion?
What do you think?
We still use them. We
on
do
all platforms?
On all platforms, not Facebook, obviously, just Instagram and TikTok. We still use them. We have done testing with the benefits with them and without them. And to be honest, there's not much of a difference. However, I would still use them to aid discoverability. I would say as the algorithms have got more sophisticated over the years, people are finding videos through obviously like your captions, text on screen, as well as hashtags. So I think they're less important now, but I would still use them, and I would still make sure you're using trending ones off of the platforms that they give you.
And they're going to do two different things. Like, I don't necessarily think hashtags are going to aid your like viral reach, so the reach within the first like week of you posting the content, but they'll probably aid your cumulative reach over time that's based off of search queries. So it depends, like, what are you using social for? And I think that's one thing that people need to be mindful of, is you can't measure all pieces of content with one specific metric or within one like measurement strategy. Because say for example you're a hotel and you want to be front of mind for those looking to visit Edinburgh, and you've got a hotel in Edinburgh, not everyone that is going to be looking for that is going to need it right now, but what you want is every time someone searches hotels in Edinburgh, you want to be the one that's coming up first for that. So that piece of content probably isn't going to go viral within the first 2 weeks of it going out, but it's going to continually get more reach over time. In the same way that people would look at like YouTube videos in different ways, there's going to be very timely and culturally relevant YouTube videos that are going to get 95% of their views within the first 2 weeks of posting. And then you're going to get ones that are like, I'm using the travel industry here just because it's an easy one for us to apply to, but like, hotel rooms, for example, when they do hotel room tours of specific hotels, that's going to get reach over time because of the nature of when people need that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I also think another point, which I see quite a lot, is people using really niche hashtags to using more broad hashtags. And I think the only time I might ever use a niche hashtag, because I don't really encourage it that much, is if you were doing a campaign and you wanted to show up under a specific hashtag that belonged to the campaign. Yeah. Other than that.
But what's even the value of having a campaign specific hashtag? I think it's a bit cringy when people have campaign specific hashtags.
I mean, I feel like it was back. That's a real Twitter thing. Or X,
Yeah,
like
but
early
people are
Twitter.
still,
No, that was early Twitter when you wanted an exclusive one, because then you came up on the. No, but that's I'm saying that's. But you said the whole title of this is why it's stuck in 2015. It's because people have still got this mindset that having a hashtag like
your
that
campaign
is
must have a hashtag.
Yeah,
No, it
doesn't.
Yeah,
unless the campaign does not need a hashtag.
Unless it's super relevant to it, it doesn't. It really doesn't.
It doesn't need it.
Yeah,
like you can have a name. It just doesn't have to be a hashtag.
I think it's interesting because what also happens is, it's again to the points that you're making is it's void of human behaviour. Because if you're creating a campaign which is for a travel client or whatever about a specific city, I'm not typing the brand name and then I'm just saying things to do in Spain. Not so if as soon as you start putting brand, and people aren't doing that. It's I'm looking for a specific city or moment or place or restaurant or whatever. Where it is relevant is, I think, if you're trying to create. I think Cadbury have done it recently where it was like Cadbury moments and that idea, or share a moment or something. It actually wasn't even Cadbury. It was like share a moment. Yeah, but the idea of share a moment is in of itself quite unique but distinct, because as soon as you sit on it, click on it, you realise that they're sitting in that space and they own it. But you could put the brand name, but actually it's an ownable hashtag because there's not much that sits around it. For a moment, it works because that's what they're trying to create. But in general, no one's going brand
I don't know. I guess what would be helpful from having a branded hashtag would be from like a social listening perspective, because if you did get people using it, then you would be able to like track that. But also, I think really where the value is more so is being able to have a campaign name and like messaging that's able to easily flow through both like in video, in asset copy, through into your caption. Like if your campaign is reliant on the use of a branded hashtag in there, like it's a weak campaign, don't put it out there, please.
No, I agree. I think it's more the tracking element and to be able to see the UGC content coming through on it if you were going to do a campaign hashtag. But like Adam said, don't make it brand specific, make it more generic.
Yeah, I agree. One thing that we see all the time, it's like one of the first things that we'll look at when we audit an organic social account will be community. And there's so many times like big household names come to us and we're like, you're literally not responding to any of your comments. You're not speaking to any of your community. And like, we're really trying at the minute to treat like comments as content. And there's such a missed opportunity because sometimes in the comments you will get, you know, one person, some random person could comment something and could get like 20,000 likes. And that it could be more likes than the actual piece of content itself.
And that is a reactive opportunity in itself, having good community management and being on it. That in itself is a whole reactive opportunity that I think is massively overlooked.
And I think the other thing as well is that one thing people get really wrong with their content strategy, which is probably the most necessary component of an organic strategy, is using comments and doing like niche audience research on the likes of Reddit, Quora, Discord, and using that to not only be part of that conversation if it's authentic, but also to take that and understand the types of language your audience are using within their kind of own version of pop culture, if that makes sense, and also like come away with content ideas which show them what they actually want to see there. So many times we get people they'll have like a persona of their target audience and they'll be like, well, I don't think John would like that piece of content. And it's like, yes, but look at what your actual audience want to see, and they get so wrapped up.
The best one's always when you see people do a post which like asks their community, like, you know, how do you use this product? And then you've got an engaged community and they all say, oh, I do it this way, blah, blah, blah. And then nothing happens afterwards. And you're like, put yourself in the real world. That's like somebody you admire or follow. They've asked you a question, you've given them an answer and they've just walked off. They've not even answered you. And you're like, you know, you look at them, there's sometimes thousands of comments. You're like, that's a year's worth of content.
Yeah.
If you took all of them, you could just be like, so-and-so said this, here's like, if you took, like, again, like, it's just...
And you'd get the engagement on it because it's from your actual community.
Yeah. It's such a weird thing. Just, maybe we should all start acting like, you know, how people do on their social when they ask these questions and they just be like, see you later. I'm not even going to answer it. Thanks for coming.
One thing I think we kind of talked already about people kind of defaulting to the likes of, you know, TikTok and Instagram, but I do think in 2025 we're kind of back in time a little bit with the likes of your more conversational platforms. And I think so we actually talked about it in a previous podcast, but Reddit saw a 47% increase in daily users in Q4 alone last year. And we're seeing some really good brands like GoPro, Duolingo, Red Bull do a really good opportunity of kind of taking they're not saying like, here's our product, what do you think of our product? Like Red Bull, for example, will go, okay, we're doing this stunt, for example. What do you do you think it's possible? Like, let's have a conversation about it. And Duolingo will get involved in more subreddits and they'll post them about language and particular cultures because they are a language app, for example. And I do think that we will start seeing that as more of a... Well, I think brands should be hopping on that if they're not already.
Definitely. Would you see that, though, sitting, interestingly, because I have an opinion on this, would you see that sitting with a social media manager to manage that, though, on those platforms? Or would you see that with, like, a specific in-house copywriter or an agency copywriter?
I think it sits within... It's like part of your social strategy, but it would be monitored by a social media manager, but it would probably sit with a community team, a community and listening team that kind of sit and like they are that audience basically, and they're able to, and to do that successfully, you really need to have like a character that you're kind of playing when you're responding to people, so they really get used to your tone of voice and stuff like that. But it is it's a different ecosystem and I think that's where it's probably getting quite difficult for brands to effectively have a social strategy, because we went from this period of just having, okay, one social media manager can do everything. Okay, then it's not. Then it's one social media manager, a videographer over here, a paid media person over here. Like then we have probably you probably realistically need a team of 5 internally minimum for a brand to have a solid social strategy. Now we're getting even more different, because social isn't one channel, it's multiple channels. You need your community driven copywriter, and that's not the skills of a traditional copywriter. That's someone that loves social, can get into the comments, knows how to navigate these platforms. Then you need your overall, it's just never ending, literally. And even as an agency, it's something that we have to navigate as well.
Because that was just going to be my point. I don't see that sitting with your traditional social media manager. I think it sits outside of that, and it's a completely different skill set to what a social media manager is.
I think it's a different skill set, but the role of the social media manager is go, what is our activity on all of social? On all of social, and what almost. And I know that this is a bit outdated, but I do actually think it's really helpful to frame your train of thought. But when we think about funnel activity, so if we think about more of our search related platforms as more of that middle to bottom of funnel on social, because it is more in market people that are already aware of your product. And then when you take those platforms like TikTok, for example, Instagram in some ways, maybe YouTube in some ways, if you have the right content strategy in it, because then you can reach new people. But again, it completely depends on the type of content that you're posting out there. So I think if you can, a social media manager would be the one managing that, and looking at, our resources going in the right places. Are we spending our budget? And that's not just including media spend and kind of out of pocket costs. That's including the resource of your time and your people, because ultimately that is money at the end of the day as well. It's a spooky world out there. It's very complicated. And then you've also got social specific creative directors. We, as everyone knows, I found it quite difficult to find creative directors that actually truly understood social. I know we have Mel, and she's amazing, but that in itself is something that a lot of brands need. And you end up having a lot of people, if we look at the likes of Adenola and those other brands that have really grown through social, they'll have creative directors that didn't do really any of the creative director training that you would expect them to do, but they would have completely been raised through having good taste and really understanding social and their audience, which is just as valid, if not more valid in today's society than the traditional route. But that's a bit of a bitter pill for some people to swallow. Does that make sense? It's a bit of a savage point, sorry, to anyone watching this. That's a traditional creative director. What do you think about the value of engagement? So what is the value of engagement? That's a really strange question to ask.
It's quite broad.
But I guess I'm saying broadly brands, and we do too sometimes, we probably need to change this. We look at engagement rate, and we have weighted engagement rate as well, which looks at whatever's most important. But there's a huge psychological difference, and a difference between the intent of a like and a save and a share. And so how do we navigate that?
Again, it's down to user behavior, isn't it? If you share a piece of content, you've resonated with it. If you've saved a piece of content, you're coming back to it. And if you've liked a piece of content, you just like it, don't you? Yeah, cute. Funny. So I think obviously your shares and your saves are your higher intent metrics that we have been looking at, and we are starting to measure a lot more across all of our content. And actually, strangely, our shares have increased massively last year. So you're obviously seeing that more engaged community on your platforms. So I think engagement, it's shifting in terms of how we're measuring it and what metrics we're looking at when we're measuring it.
I think a like is almost not, it doesn't mean.
No.
One thing I thought was really interesting, actually I'm surprised more platforms haven't done it, is when Facebook introduced reactions. Because reactions to me were an absolute gold mine for brands and storytelling, because you're able to create content to incite a reaction and then measure, or a feeling, and then measure it against the reaction that people are using to share its success. Nobody else has really sort of taken that on.
TikTok now have dislike as well on the platform.
But dislike to me would be one of those ones which I think is more important, because if you watch people on Instagram, like sometimes they just they're just liking.
I never like anyone's stuff
You know,
on TikTok.
they either like it.
It
There's
takes a
no.
lot, to be fair.
And then
And I think people need to understand like consumer behavior there as well. But I think one really clever tip that I would give brands to do would be align each of your pieces of content to an objective, which we would call a pillar basically. But you might have a piece of content and the objective is that you want people to share it. So you want members of your existing audience that are aware of your brand to want to send that piece of content to a friend. So it means that you might have a message on there that is focused around a specific problem that people have. And so I don't know, I'm going to use a really bad example here, but say that you know that your friend has like suffers with their skin, for example, and has been like trying to find new skin products, for example. It might be like how this product does XYZ, and the messaging is tailored to that. So you want people to share it to people with like similar problems and stuff like that. So it's thinking about what action you want someone to take off the back of it. And it might just be that you want to get a whole lot of broad reach on that piece of content, and that's okay. And it might be that people are just sharing it because they're like, this is really fucking fun.
And I think look at your CTAs as well, because we're finding, and I don't think this is particularly rocket science, but like those ones where it's like, stop, this must recipe you must try this week. Those are the ones that people are saving, obviously, because you've got that strong CTA at the beginning.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to echo with like content strategy in general is, and again, to us, like this isn't rocket science, this is pretty self-explanatory, but it's like the arc of how to tell a story on social. And sometimes you'll get brands that try and approach it, or even when they're giving feedback on content, and they'll look at it like a traditional story arc where it's kind of like it builds, and then it ends in a crescendo. That's like a very traditional way of telling a story with on social. You need to go straight up in the first 2 seconds to hook attention in, and then you can kind of come a little bit down, but it kind of needs to be a little bit more like a roller coaster as opposed to that like consistent steady line, because you don't have people's attention spans for that long. And I think the brands whose social strategy is stuck in 2015 are the brands that don't understand the way that consumers of social content work and how their audience specifically works.
I agree with that.
Anything else that we want to talk about?
I think we've covered a fair amount.
Anything on your notes that we haven't yapped about?
I think almost there's an element of to I suppose to wrap it up in terms of 2015 and now is, sounds strange in a way, but like you almost need to just disregard what you think you know about social and almost actually go back to 2015 thinking, but with a layer of audience behavior purpose to it, in that social is a great opportunity of building communities and engaging with people. That's sort of what it started as. We've shifted to this world of like, we must appease everyone, we must do this, the algorithms are more important than our audience and our content, and to your point, like how we tell a story. And actually, if you just take it back and go, well, really, what are we trying to do? We want to get people who are interested in our product or would be interested in our product to either engage with us or have an action, but just add sensible layers to it. Just start thinking about, now it's not just Facebook, you've got 20 channels. Where do we actually sit? Where do we play? What's important to us, rather than trying to do everything like that's. And so you are just, I think it is stripping it back, but it's trying to just put sensible layers to it, and then really thinking about what is important to us. It's not just about follower growth. It's, we're actually trying to do this. Yeah. And I think then if you can do that, you automatically will start to, reconsider what we're doing, where we exist. And otherwise you are like, how many pieces of content per second, you're going to get lost if you're not in the right places and think about it's just a mess out there. You're trying to just produce and compete in a space which is like we said, sometimes isn't even right for you. Why are you here? It's not, no one's looking for you here. And you're jumping around trying to shout and spending a load of money and then maybe not happy at the end of the month with the results. And it's like, but everyone's
And that's
they're,
that's
they're
our
all
job
they're all over here,
to
mate.
say to clients like,
yeah.
no, that's not your space to be in.
Yeah,
This is your space.
they're
to
over
be
here.
In. Yeah.
They're doing
But,
this.
That's why
you know.
I really like it when clients come to you and they say, "This is our overall business objective for social. Help us figure out where we should be alive and how we should look at this platform, and don't just go, we want to be on TikTok, we want to be on Instagram. Okay, well, why? Why do you want to be there? Do you know what a really interesting one is? Like 3 years ago, every single new business call we had, there would be like a huge section where they would ask about like attribution. Revenue attribution for organic social, and that stopped happening now because I think people have just realized that, like, okay, yes, it is going to have an impact on your revenue, but it is a brand building activity, which is just an interesting observation. But you were going to say something.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, know your audience, know your platform, know where your audiences are on your platforms, and create content specific to both of those things, and test and learn. That's all I would say.
Like, it's not that deep, but it does need to be smart. And I think sometimes people don't think about it as much as they should, and they just think, oh, we'll just go create some content. What are you actually creating? What are you trying to do here? So it does require thought, and it does require care, and you shouldn't just do it because you see a competitor doing it, for example.
They might not be doing it that well. You know, there's I don't know, I'd have to check, but you know, Currys do fun content. You know, they always pop up. They're like a marketer's dream on LinkedIn because they do good stuff and they jump on all the trends. I'd be really interested to understand what impact that has had on their bottom line, because they're doing a great brand job. It may have had an impact, I don't know, but also at the same time, again, all the things we've talked about, where's that user journey? Or their strategy may be do fun content because our audience is aging, we need to bring a young, like, that might be the answer, and it's a longer term, but
that activity is related to. So then if I was them, I would have that, like, so that would probably be the result of, I'm trying to engage an aging audience that within the next sort of 2 to 3 years are probably going to be moving into their first flat that they're renting. They're going to need technology and furniture to do that, so that would be that. And then I would also be underpinning that with a search-led strategy that is tailored to specific categories.
So a great example, like if you're one of their competitors, like you said, a John Lewis, in a sense, where they've got their tech, don't do what they're doing. Because it's not your
that doesn't
maybe
mean
not
don't
your
be
audience.
On the platform, you need to take your own content
exactly.
stance and your own creative stance.
They might be looking for different things, or there might be a different way of doing it, and it's better to say start with that audience. And I think that's to the point you're making of, like, just because everyone's doing it.
Like, take the time to test your creative angle, and don't just do one piece of content and go, well, that didn't work, so we're not going to do it again. Like, the brands that do it really well have consistent content series that they can be owned for, and they'll have a rule around reactive content. But if you can find something that you can really become known for within your audience, and something that they think brings them value, whether that's through a laugh or genuinely a piece of education, that's where really the strength is going to be. So you do have to be persistent, and particularly at the start, understand that not everything is going to fly, and making sure that you're just realistic with your expectations, but also ambitious at the same time. Like, you would like to hope that within 3 months you fund a content series that your audience is resonating with and that is growing on a regular basis. And then again, you need to feed that through down to your reporting to make sure that you're saying, well, this content series as a whole delivered this many impressions, or whatever your core KPI is this month. And then taking that a step further, if you need to report to a board perspective, is, well, what was the media value of that? And thinking a bit smarter, one, about how you're categorizing stuff from a strategic perspective, but then equally delivering the results back to the business. And also, like, just don't get caught up in the weeds of reporting. Like, reporting is so important, but you need to be smart about how you're reporting, and it's more, you need to focus more on what that tells you about your audience in line with your objective and the actions that you need to take, because there's so much that you could look at, and really the strategy whenever it comes down to reporting is knowing what key metrics to look at. Is that a fair summary?
I think so.
Right, stunning. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for watching, listening, however you have consumed this. Please do like, subscribe, and come back every week because we post lots of content.